1,000 employees in 205 branches across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Northwest Territories. Monique is a member of the board of the Canadian Women's Foundation and a regular speaker on both Aboriginal peoples and women in leadership. She credits her Métis heritage with instilling in her the importance of values and traditions, all of which have contributed to her success. Monique Bateman.
Thank you, Marie. And education and employment when it comes to Aboriginal people. And I grew up in Manitoba. I grew up in a small town of about 300 people. We were all Métis, so there was no differences. It was quite interesting growing up with a grandfather that spoke to us and also sang to us in Cree. I wish I would have learned a lot more of the language, and so it does give me an opportunity to go back and learn that as well. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself as I go through the presentation. One of the common themes that we've heard today is the link to education. Over the last couple years, our TD Economics Group has produced a number of reports, and what we're trying to do is link it to issues and opportunities with the Aboriginal people and the Aboriginal communities. And I would tell you, when we first started on this journey, we had to do a lot of selling. Why was it important? Is this the right timing? How do we make sure that we're addressing the right issues? And it was through collaboration. We had to speak to people that this was an important issue for as well. And that's actually how we started producing these reports. And many of them are on our TD website, so if you're ever interested, I encourage you to go on there and look at them as well. But as we go through, education. It's no secret in this room that as you link education, people get more education, employment rates do go up. And we also know that when education goes up, employment income goes up, and it's also linked to much more economic prosperity and also employment participation. And quite frankly, we also know that there's a link to health as well. And it's really important for us. But if you look at the first chart, that's to my right, your left, we see that as we get education, if you look at the less than under the high school, the employment rate is relatively low. But as you start seeing the high school only, trade, whether you get a certificate in trades or an apprentice certificate, college diploma, and bachelor's degree, you actually do start to see higher employment rates within the Aboriginal community. And a lot of the census comes from the Canada Census source as well, from 2011. So for us, when we started to look at this, we thought there was a really great news story here. And then when you look on the chart to your right, you also start to see as the education becomes higher, there's actually a very, very, very narrow gap in income earned with Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people. And this is particular, if you look at people that have the bachelor's and above degree, this is where you see a marginal gap. And for me, when I started seeing this data, it really was much more, wow, there is a lot of progress being made in recognizing the talent. And if you think about the younger generation coming up and the talent pool that we're going to have over a number of years, like we've got to wake up as organizations to say, how do we tap into this as well? But it's also worth mentioning that since 2009, nearly 40% of the total job growth has been in sectors where many of the jobs do not need post-secondary education, like resource extraction, construction. But these are all really good jobs. But when we started to look at the volatility within these markets, when the markets are good, the jobs are great and the pay is great. But we also know and we also see that when the economy turns down, there's a lot of availability of people all of a sudden that do not have jobs because they've been laid off. And it's very hard to replace that income when if you're working in the oil sands. It's great income. But all of a sudden, those jobs are no longer there. And how do you replace that income? We also see that while you see that the levels of education, there's also a correlation. We see, in particular Aboriginal people, there's a lot of people employed in the construction and the resource mining. And that's just a natural thing. I mean, I just look at my relatives, and there is a direct correlation. But what we also see is the demand in corporate society. We have a need for talented leaders going forward. I mean, you heard stats on the availability of jobs that's going to come open from 2016 and beyond. And as corporate organizations, we've got to prepare our young and our youth to take over those leadership jobs in the future as well. What was really interesting when I was looking at the stats was the people with the higher education weren't the ones in the construction. They were actually in corporate society as well. But what was even more prevalent was how much they were contributing back to their communities as well. So there is a definite link there as well. The other stat that I was, my coworker here, Sherry's gonna say, she's on a tangent again. What was really interesting in the stats that we were looking at is, and I follow this quite closely, over the last number of years, what we're seeing is there's a lot more Aboriginal people going for post-secondary education. Whether they're going right after high school, but what we're seeing, there's more going once their children are settled in school. What we're seeing is that there's more Aboriginal people going for post-secondary education. And in fact, what's happened is, if you think of the rate of people leaving high school, what we saw was there's a higher increase of people actually getting post-secondary education. And that's going to be critical for us over the next number of years. Because what we know is that there is a direct correlation in higher education, higher employment, higher income, which gives us the ability to contribute back to our communities. There is a direct correlation there as well. When we looked at the number of companies as well that were hiring, and I've been through this because, as Marie said, I've been with the bank for 34 and a half years. I've had 28 jobs with the bank, believe it or not. Yeah, my husband said I could never hold down a job. I always thought that I was good at what I did, so they wanted to promote me, but obviously he had a different point of view. But what we saw previously was organizations felt that they had to hire Aboriginal people. So for those of us that are in the audience here, I don't know what you saw, but I had a lot of people, a lot of organizations try to recruit me because I was Aboriginal. And honestly, if you're an organization, you've got to hire the right talent. You've got to hire the right people that match what you need, because the last thing you want to do is create the sense of you're hiring for numbers. It is not a numbers game. It is a talent game. And that's what we've all got to make sure that we understand as well. The less than high school, so the grade 12 school, what we're seeing is we still see a number of individuals that are dropping out. And it's around that grade 10 education. And if we can actually stop that grade 10 and encourage our young people to stay in school, this is where we're going to make a difference. But in fact, what we actually know now is that the decision isn't made in grade 10. Our young people are making that decision in grade 7. Because at that grade 7, that's usually when, maybe they feel that they can't keep up with their peers. Maybe they're not getting the right level of support. Maybe they feel that they don't really know where they belong. And in the community that I grew up in, I actually saw that. A lot of people that I grew up with, not a lot, but a fair number, did not finish high school, did not get post-secondary education. I grew up in a family where my father said two things. you will get an education. The second thing he said is, none of my children will ever go to jail, because that was something that was happening in our community as well. So I'm the fifth child of 9 children. And we were all very close, but we also knew whether you had a headache, you had a cold, you had pneumonia, you were still going to school. And yes, we had to be bused, so we had a long ways to go to school. And what these slides really show is, with the heavy overrepresentation in areas of education, healthcare, and public administration, and this was specifically for the Aboriginal people, we see a lot more people going into that field. And it's to no surprise, because when you look at communities, that's really what is going to be available. But I know I speak for some of my colleagues out there, you know, what we also need to do is really look at, how do we encourage people to go beyond the traditional roles? How do we encourage people to go into finance, to go into the financial industry? When I tell people that I've had 28 different roles with the company, they're astounded, because they think of banking as typical banking roles. You become a teller, you become a salesperson, you become a branch manager. It is well beyond all that in today's world. Yes, I was a teller. I was a branch manager. But then after that, I was able to dabble in technology. I was in finance, I was in human resources. I led different regions. I was able to actually do a lot more and grow with a great company. And I always say that I had 34 and a half years, 28 different roles, but 1 pension. And that makes a big difference as well. And we also know that people with post-secondary education do become a lot more proactive and a lot more active within their own communities. They become role models for others. And being role models for me is really critical. When I think about my first role model, my first professional role model was my teacher. And to this day, and through my whole career, my grade 6 teacher was still my mentor. She was Métis, and she came to our school in this, you know, you figure a three-room schoolhouse. But for me, she represented the possibilities that were available, and not have the traditional, you know, you get married, you have children, you get old, you grow old together, and then the cycle starts. My mother always said to us, it is our generation to make a difference. We grew up poor. My father was in construction. He had a grade 8 education. My mother went back to get her grade 12. But one of the things that my mother always instilled in us was, it is our turn to make a difference. And that's why education was so important to her and to my father. My father did not want us growing up the way that he had a loving family, but he wanted more for us. And when I think about, how do we encourage our young Aboriginal youth today? Who do they have to turn to? Where do they go for that words of encouragement? How do they link to others? How do we link them to, you know, people that we think could be professional role models for them? My nieces and nephews growing up, they also knew they were going to get post-secondary education. All of them have got it, except for one, but she's only 6 years old, so I'll give her a few more years yet. But it was really important, and as a matter of fact, my niece she's more like my daughter to me. She went in to become an RN, and she's now getting her master's. Because and someone asked, why are you getting your master's? She says, it's just the thing we do around this family. You know, and I think that's what's really important as well. When you look at this slide, you know, one of the things I've already talked about, but what really is in this slide is, when you look to the one on the left, the first is Aboriginal people. The second line is actually on Aboriginal people on reserve. The other one is Aboriginal off reserve, and then non-Aboriginal people. And then very similar to a lot of the different levels of education, but also when you start to look at the different jobs that the Aboriginal people tend to go into. And again, you'll look at education and healthcare and public services. And again, absolutely, absolutely great careers. But there's so many other possibilities out there. But what we also know is as we open up those doors to other possibilities, you actually can get higher income. And this isn't all about income, it has to be satisfaction as well. But I will tell you, if I hadn't ended up with the career I have, I would not be able to do the things I do for my family and for the community that I also belong to as well. We also have to look at how do we encourage our young youth in high school? How do we get them to stay in high school? How do we encourage that grade 7, how do we make it interesting for them to actually want to finish? The traditional ways of teaching, my first grade 5 were all taught by nuns. And let me tell you, they were strict. So when I got that grade 6 teacher, that was more like what I thought a teacher should be, that's when my turning point was. But times change. So what do we need to do and how do we help the educators understand we have to do things differently? If you think 5 years down the road, what would education look like, feel like, and sound like? And how do we keep people engaged in that part of it as well? The other interesting thing is, and this is near and dear to my heart, is women and children, or women and girls. A huge, huge opportunity for us. When you look at the number of Aboriginal women that are getting post-secondary education versus men, and this is Aboriginal, it's 65%. But we also see in the stats that many of us got our education later. But if we can get those young girls in that grade 7 to grade 12 and encourage them to stay in school, we'd have some great, great female leaders for the future as well. On Sunday, it was International Women's Day. I don't know how many of you watched Twitter or watched a whole bunch of stuff that was happening, but it was quite fascinating. So this has been going on for a number of years now. The opportunity we have is to celebrate those moments. Make those young girls feel important. Make them feel that it is worth investing in them as well. When I look back, and whether it was employees or whether it was my poor family, which I tortured, about how do you keep them interested? How do you get them to feel that they can do a lot more and they're worth the investment? And that's what's really important. We will need more female leaders in the future. Are we where we need to be at TD? Absolutely not. But we are making great progress. And no offense to the men in the room, but women do think differently. We bring different perspectives, but it's a great balance. And it actually is, if you sit around a room with both men and women, it's a great balance and a lot of great conversations and some pretty good debates as well. But again, if you look at the possibilities with the women and girls in the Aboriginal communities, this is a huge opportunity for us because we're seeing 65% are getting post-secondary education versus Aboriginal men as well. So again, for me, this was a slide that I went, wow, what the possibilities that we have in the future. So best practices. So I always ask the so what question. So why is this important? What's TD doing about it? Right? How do we engage others to make sure that this is an important part? Because again, employment is linked to prosperity, but it's also linked to be able to give back to the community. And I know for many of us, that's really important as well. It's also important to partner with community. This isn't about one or the other. We actually look at talent and recruiting talent along with supporting communities, but also investing in the communities as well as business. So this isn't just a one pillar thing. We know that as a bank, as TD, we need to do all four. We invest in the community, We want to be a business partner, and we want talent for a future within the bank as well. We have to create awareness about the possibilities of what's happening in the banks. Like, how many of you would have thought, you know, there was 28 different roles out there that you could have as a career in banking? And that's not all of them. There's a lot more out there as well. The other thing is role models and teaching. When we train our leaders, we also train about diversity. And Aboriginal is in there. It wasn't always in there when we started down this journey. But many years ago, our leader, Ed Clark, said this is an important part of Canada. It's an important part of who we want to be known for. And he made it a strategic priority, which was absolutely, you know, something that we wanted to see. In the banking industry, just in Canada, there's 275,000 jobs and another 115,000 jobs in the insurance industry as well. So when you look at that, and that's not even including the accounting part or anything else, there's tremendous opportunity out there when you look at the finance and in the various industries as well. But what do we need? We need role models. I heard this over and over as I visited universities, as I visited the high schools. I love going in and talking to the Aboriginal youth and share my story, because again, they need the role models. And it's really important that we all tell our stories, because we all have different stories. And if you had an hour, I'd tell you my whole story, but of course you don't have an hour either. But again, if you look at the different ways that we can actually make people curious, engage them early as well. Institutional commitment. When you look at the labor force that's coming up, and we heard all the stats, but we also heard from Hope some staggering stats this morning as well, and we've got to reverse that. We've got to reverse those stats. And it's really important, and I truly believe that education is going to be one of those opportunities that we have. It is a burning platform. We need to keep our youth in school. We need to get them to feel that this is part of their growing as well. Cultural competency and grassroots capability. We have a recruiter at TD specifically for Aboriginal recruitment. But we know, and we made the decision a long time ago, he will not do this on his own. We need grassroots, and we need local participation. And at TD, our people out in the field, whether you're in BC or you're in Nova Scotia, you will have participation locally from our teams out there as well. We have different outreach programs. We're at the universities, we're at the high schools, we're at the colleges as well, because again, for us, it really is about talking about the financial industry and the possibilities that are out there. Once you hire someone, it doesn't stop at hiring. I was able to mentor a number of young Aboriginal people who came to us, and we said, so why are you with us? And they said, well, where I worked before, they made promises to me, but they never kept their promise. And I said, well, what do you mean? They told me about development. They talked to me about, you know, a career path, but it never happened. Hiring is one of the starting point, but you've got to keep them engaged. At TD, we have personal development plan for every single employee. It's an accountability for their leader, and it's an accountability for the employee. But you've got to keep them engaged. Our circle member at TD is over 800 now. And over half of the 800 of our employee circle group want to be actively participate in our initiatives that we do at TD around Aboriginal employees, which is, for me, is such a delight. So I know that through the cultural things that we do, the celebrations, Aboriginal Day celebrations, the role models that we have, you know what? I look back at the number of years that I've had at TD, and I'm really proud of the progress. But we've got a lot more to go yet, and our jobs aren't finished. So thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Kelly Lendsay is a social entrepreneur who is internationally recognized as one of Canada's foremost innovators of Indigenous workplace inclusion, diversity, and partnership building. He is the inaugural president and CEO of the Aboriginal Human Resource Council, and he has successfully led this organization since 1998, and he has grown and engaged corporate Canada in Indigenous workplace inclusion. He has developed the council into an ISO certified national social enterprise, which creates trusting relationships that form new social and economic capital across Canada and around the world. He also leads the council's new charity, which is called Cochita, designed to empower Indigenous youth to reach their human resource and career potential. This organization is tackling the social deficits of poverty, despair, and hopelessness with a growing group of partners focused on reversing the history of exclusion to unleash the path of human resource potential. Kelly Lendsay.
For those of you that follow basketball, thank you for sticking around for the last 2 minutes of the game. Or it's the third period of the hockey game. You know, TD Bank, they're one of our corporate clients. They're members of the leadership circle. And I'm just so pleased that for everyone that has stayed, you're in a draw for $1,000 from TD at the end of this session.
Oh, sorry, we didn't get business cards.
To our elder, thank you. You talked about this room being like an acre of land. And this forum is about all the leaders that we've gathered here today to have an exchange and a dialogue. So, Elder, I say that I look at these leaders like manure. When spread out, we do a lot of good. But in a pile? You know, I've heard some interesting comments. One of them was the demographic dividend that Adida brought out, and the opposite of a demographic dividend is a demographic deficit. And I think that, you know, I look at my own upbringing, same story, first in my family to go to university, you know, to get university educated. I was a professor. I learned very quickly that what differentiates people who succeed and don't succeed at education is three things. First of all, education is hard work, it's discipline, and it's study habits, which is really no different than what you do every day at work, right? And, you know, I say to my kids, I got 3 kids in university. I didn't learn how to study until second year university. And I had a good friend, he's still a good friend to this day, Ian Pike, who's from Britain. And he grew up in Britain with study hours. Discipline, set aside study hours. Friday nights, we would go out partying. But Ian had this habit, he would study, he'd have dinner and study from 6:30 to 9 and then go out. And he got me into this habit of setting aside and setting up dedicated. And I look at those types of very sort of pragmatic tools and practices. And, you know, that's what I say to my kids. They each have their own study habits. I think people are trying to make education, you know, so much fun. And yet, really, what it is a lot of discipline. And I know, because you people have to discipline yourselves to learn new things, to do your jobs. I'm going to take a different twist in the close today to talk more about you and workplaces and what employers are doing around and having a leadership discussion around this, around workplace inclusion, systems and strategies. You know, it's interesting, I've never given my kids money for marks or anything. I got a kid in first year kinesiology, he's 19. I got a daughter in second year medicine, she's 22, and a 23-year-old in business school. And one day, I told them that there was an international exam, and I said, don't compare yourselves to everyone else, because there's a whole bunch of mark inflation. Well, see, what happened was they went into the basement, they found my report cards from when I was a kid, and they looked at it and they said, geez, Dad, look at this one, grade 2. If Kelly continues to improve his reading skills, his lisp will improve. And they said, Dad, you really weren't that smart at all. I said, well, look, there's all this mark inflation today. I got them to take this test, and they got, one of them got 65%. These are A students. And I gave him $5. Nigel, his name's Nigel. I gave him $5. He said, what's this for? I said, because learning is about going to places you don't want to go. You now know where you want to have to learn and do more. It's the only time I gave them bucks. My journey was one of industry, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, that when you think about leadership, the leadership that's assembled in this room, and you think about courageous leadership, I think you would agree that an excellent example of that is what we heard in Stephen Kakfui today. Let's give him a round of applause, please. You know, I too know what it was like to have my innocence taken between 9 and 10 years of age in my hometown of Roster. But the difference is, I grew up with a loving family, lots of support, great teachers, coaches, and sexual abuse never trapped me. The difference when I look to Stephen and friends like Phil Fontaine and men and women in residential schools, raped of their culture, raped physically, raped spiritually. At nights they had to go sleep on a cot. They went home once or twice a year. They were lonely. And I get so inspired by guys like Stephen. Whenever I think our jobs get tough, and I know you folks out in the audience here, I think we need to say, hey, we gotta suck it up. There's more to be done. We need to be strong. We need that courage. And I came up with this saying, we have to develop ourselves on the inside to do this work on the outside. I went up to Stephen and I said, Stephen, I gotta tell you, my mom gave me a great quote. And she said, you grow stronger in the broken places. I gave that to him. I think that leadership today is about confronting, like all of us are doing, our challenges from our past growing up and the challenges that we face tomorrow. And to hope, I wanted to say that it's interesting, I was a lucky kid, surrounded by great opportunities, basketball, I was saved by life-saving and lifeguarding, developed all my leadership skills. I was a vice president, president of my school, but I took a wrong turn at 15 and it was drugs. I got picked up by a policeman, an RCMP officer, drives me to the outskirts of town, and he says, you get one chance. I'm gonna bust you, I'm gonna bust all your friends. I'm bringing down the drugs that are coming into town, and I know it's you guys. You're a good kid. Your parents are great. You got everything going for you. So here's your one chance. You're gonna show up on Saturday and you're gonna start washing cop cars. Quit drugs. I give no second chances. And he kicked me out of the car. And I walked home. He's died now. His name's George Wooten. I showed up and I started washing cop cars on Saturday. Of course, the night before, my parents said, what are you doing? I said, well, I applied for this job and I actually got a job. Cop cars, yeah. Showed up. 2 years later, I was babysitting his children. 20 years later, I went to Nova Scotia where George retired, and I eventually settled with this guy and got very close to him. And I took my 2 children at the time, I had 5 in total. I took 2 kids and my wife, and I went and I said, thanks, George. You not only saved me, but you saved them. And that's what we do. Leadership is about reaching back and reaching forward. And I think we heard so many, great stories and examples of that today. And I think what happened to me is because of life-saving and lifeguarding, I taught children how to swim. I taught lifeguards how to save. I had lots of opportunities to travel in life-saving and lifeguarding. I spent the first 10 years of my life in aquatic and recreation management. Had a rescue company. I've jumped out of helicopters. I've gone down fast-flowing rivers. Pretty exciting. And in 1991, I decided I wanted to go back to university and do my MBA. And Oka happened. And Oka rocked me. I thought, I'm from Saskatchewan. We don't do this in Canada. a white military man lost his life. We had a standoff in this country. And a young gal, who was, I think, 14 at the time, has a scar on her chest, and you're going to hear her speak tonight, Monique Bateman. Oka bothered me to the core. And I said, I think I can contribute and make a difference. And that was my journey into Aboriginal inclusion. I focused on how to get more Aboriginal people into business education programs. We started the first Aboriginal business education program in Canada in '95. We had 2 forward-thinking deans. Did that for 3-4 years, consulting work. And in '98, this opportunity came available because the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People was released in '96, and this was one of 434 recommendations that will close the gaps. It was to create more like a partnership council that would pull together the private sector. It would pull together education, government, unions, Aboriginal communities to create the partnerships that we need. So I went down that journey, and here we are. It's still been a great journey, and our focus has been on focusing on the workplace. But I'm always trying to soar to new heights, and I think we all have to say, each and every day, it's not just youth, how do we actually go to work, develop our own paths, and try to soar to new leadership heights? That's why I like the whole thing about this Creative Leadership Forum. So I want to share with you what I'm doing to try to soar to new heights. Okay, so thank you. You got the pitch here, formed in '98, ISO certified, workplace focused. And really what we're doing is we have a workplace model. It's called the Inclusion Continuum. It's got 7 stages to the roadmap. And why companies like it is because it's simple. It's a roadmap. The first 3 stages are negative, indifference, intimidation, and image. Indifference, we don't care. Intimidation, what's the minimum we need to do to avoid a lawsuit or to meet our compliance or employment equity audits? And image is some of those corporate boardrooms I go into. Boy, they got beautiful native art everywhere. No native people working there, but boy, they have great art. Or it's corporations that buy tables at our corporate events. And they take a check mark and they say, yeah, we really support Aboriginal economic and employment development, and the table's empty that night. You can't do that anymore. Worked in the 80s and into the 90s. Today, image can hurt you. The real business case starts at initiation, where there's a business spark. There is a business case developed for developing Aboriginal inclusion strategies. If that initiation case is nurtured and you get senior management on board, it goes to the next stage, which is incubation, where it starts to move across the enterprise from human resources to procurement to CSR, marketing, and communications and leadership. If it continues to go there, integration becomes where inclusion is seen as a catalyst for growth, and finally, you're maximizing your performance at the inclusion stage, where it's maximizing performance for everyone in the organization, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal alike. That's the model. You can see that we have a number of corporate partners. There was mention of Kachita. Kachita is what we do on the supply side. So the council works on the demand side with employers, working on your management competencies and your workplace strategies. Kachita focuses on the supply side. One of the things we're doing on the supply side is e-mentorship. We did a pilot with this in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan at Aswayak High School. I want every youth to have an e-mentor. I think it will, number 1, keep kids in high school. Number 2, give them a vision to see themselves in the workforce. 3, propel them into post-secondary training, because every employer in this room needs people with post-secondary training. So e-mentorship is about how do we connect all these volunteers, TD Bank, I look out here, IBM, I look at all these companies. How do we connect your employees to be volunteers, to be e-mentors? And how do we provide the scale? So we're moving into now a demonstration project with this, and we're pretty excited. Oh my God, Trevor, here we go. All right, so this is soaring to new heights. This is kite surfing. This is good old Saskatchewan. And turn on the music a bit there, buddy. There. So this is, I took this up about 5 years ago, and I was getting better at it, and a few years ago I decided to try it in Mexico. And so I was doing it, and I did it for 4 or 5 days in a row. And on the last day, one of my kids and my wife said, well, we better go watch Dad, or otherwise he'll pout. So they came down, and we went down to this beach, and I knew that I was in trouble. because a big gust came off the ocean. I wasn't even on the ocean yet. And I looked back, and I felt this gust. And I went from there, over top of that house, into that tree. And I knew I wanted to get out in the ocean and soar, but I look back, those are my heels going through the sand as I'm screaming. I then get pitched onto my face, get pulled face first through this rumble, get up the music a bit. I get to the bottom of this palm tree and I think, oh God, I've made it. All of a sudden my butt hits the top of that tree, I go over that roof, I fall through this tree and I crash through, and my son points out where I just missed all these cinder blocks where I landed on my back. 2 weeks later I was in Australia, and I took a lesson and went out in Botany Bay, for those of you that have been in Australia. So I'm trying to climb the new heights like I'm trying to help employers climb our inclusion continuum.
Yeah.
I've set a goal to kiteboard in every province and territory. I've done it in Iqaluit last April, Whitehorse the year before, BC, Ontario, and I'm leaving this event, and tomorrow I'm flying to Yellowknife to speak on Thursday, and I've already arranged some kiting with some people inside government and someone from the private sector to go kiting on Great Slave Lake, and then I will up in the north cover. You know, let me move that forward. So Kachita is going to deal with supply side challenges. We're trying to tap into foundations. I want you to watch this.
Some people will do anything to recruit Aboriginals.
Aboriginal! My name is Harry, and you know I'm here to stay, 'cause I'm the coolest guy in all of USA and Canada too. I'm professional, I got the whole youth, 'cause I tell all the truth. We need some Aboriginals, hey! Hey, come on! Hey!
Hopefully, your inclusion and recruitment strategy is better than this guy's. Many companies are looking to tap into Canada's Aboriginal advantage. There is a baby boom happening with Indigenous people. In fact, Aboriginal youth are Canada's fastest growing population. It's a population with some challenges. How do you reach the talent there? It's also a population with tons of potential, overcoming challenges, breaking down barriers, creating economic change, rising educational achievement, rising incomes, and Aboriginal people are becoming entrepreneurs 2.5 times as fast as other Canadians. How do we reach those bright lights? And how do you reach those future employees? The Aboriginal Human Resource Council is here to help you reach your goals and to help us reach our goals.
It's about reaching out to each other.
Reaching potential.
Reaching together.
They might even be able to help Harry.
Hey, sexy ladies, come on, everybody! Hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh.
It's about reaching med school and reaching success.
It's about reaching the big leagues.
It's about reaching grade 6.
It's about broadening our reach.
It's about reaching new heights.
It's about the kids in Attawapskat. It's about reaching them.
By 2017, the number of Aboriginal workers in Canada will reach 1 million.
I work hard for my kids. It's about reaching further for them.
It's not about relying only on ourselves. It's about reaching out to each other.
Reaching together.
It's not about a handout. It's a hand up. Reaching hand in hand.
It's not about reaching quotas. It's about reaching goals.
It's about reaching that dream job.
We're reaching for inclusion for everyone.
It's about reaching potential, not just for me, but for Canada as a whole.
Hands up, how many have seen this public service announcement? Thanks to Shaw, they've been airing this, that Reach one, but we developed these with Walk Canoe. And we've got 5 of these in an inventory in the Reaching one, but I said, you know, humor is so natural to our communities. We develop the Harry, the Aboriginal one. and as a way to sort of awaken employers. And I think that's what's interesting about this whole movement forward. I want to talk to you about this workplace inclusion system, and then I'm going to pose some questions for you as leaders in terms of the engagement of employers. So there's the stages. If you look at this, we're talking about the knowledge know-how that companies need on one axis and your selection of strategies and practices on the other axis. And it's this right mix that is becoming increasingly more sophisticated for companies. And it's the intersection of the knowledge, know-how, or the inclusion competencies that you and your managers in your firm have, and with the right practices and strategies that will determine how effective you are at actually executing your strategies. It's all about your workplace performance, your inclusion competencies, and your engagements and relationships. So we've got 9 inclusion a framework competencies here. Each of these, can you hear me okay? Okay? Each of these 9 dimensions are specific to a specific competency. So there's investment in resources, employee engagement, responsibility and accountability, positioning, leadership and governance, social impact, relationships and trust, and organizational culture, and value and validation. So what happens is you need to develop the right know-how, the knowledge know-how, with your management teams in order to then select the right strategies and practices to execute them. So I said on the bottom of the axis is your selection of strategies and practices. And indeed, you have to do these across what we call an enterprise-wide approach. You select those and you have to apply them in each of the domains: leadership, community CSR, corporate social responsibility, their business development and procurement, human resources development, and communications. So this system is really about this blending of the right inclusion competencies, strategies, and practices. You have to develop the right know-how inside your firm, and then you need the right measurement and benchmarking information. So let me just give you 4 examples out of those 9. You take something like responsibility and accountability. We have a series of questions that we take employers through, and we actually give you an inclusion score in different segments of your company for different areas, and then we drill it right down to these using this 9-point framework. So for example, each business division needs to establish what we call an accountability framework. And you have to develop the metrics for your company's inclusion strategy. And then you actually have to report on those quarterly, and then roll them up at the end of the year to actually say, did the investments we make actually have a return on investment, a return on inclusion, a return on integrity? That's sort of the 3 features that we measure. Here's social impact. Company metrics are needed to measure and understand the social economic impact where you are doing business in the backyards or with different First Nations, Métis, and Inuit groups. CSR to me is very important because it deals with so many of the socioeconomic issues that you heard today. And what we need to do is align those CSR investments with socioeconomic priorities that the community identifies and align them with future HR, procurement, and business development opportunities. It really is, I think, one of the most untapped areas. And if we do a better job of this alignment, we talk about horizontal and vertical alignment of strategies, it's actually going to generate more effective inclusion strategies for firms. In something like positioning, you're talking about what data do we need to collect in order to position our brand. How are we seen in the Aboriginal marketplace? How do they view our industry or our company? And what's a brand, folks? A brand is your promise. Today, Aboriginal folks have choices. This positioning applies not only to the private sector, it applies to governments, to unions, and it also applies to our own Aboriginal companies and our Aboriginal economic development organizations who also need to be embracing this spirit of inclusion strategies. Why? Because your children, there's non-native children, should be able to go work in our Aboriginal companies in exactly the same way I want my kids to go work in yours. Ladies and gentlemen, would you agree that is the definition of inclusion? Employee engagement. Do you have data and metrics to help confirm that employees are on board with your inclusion agenda? You heard a lot about some data today. Take a lesson from the women's movement. In the 80s, we talked about women in numbers. You've gone here, you've gone there. You've moved into entrepreneurship. Go to the universities in the 60s and 70s, no women on the walls of pharmacy, medicine, architecture. Then there's one, then there's a few more. And we kept counting the numbers. And what did women keep saying? We don't want you to talk just about our numbers. We want you to talk about the quality of our experience in the workplace. That's what we need to do. I don't care if you have low numbers. Are they good numbers? Are the ones that they're really engaged? That's the first step. And we need to get into realities with economic realities. There is a downturn. Native and non-Native people losing their jobs in the oil sector. It is about the employee engagement levels. Are there bottlenecks? What are the types of things that you need to do to position your company to have high levels of employee engagement? I worked with one company just last month. Senior manager was very nervous. We did this systems review of their company. Go in. Guess what the results were? The Aboriginal people are highly engaged, very satisfied. They like working there. They can't understand why more Aboriginal people don't apply. They only had one negative comment. They said, we just don't know why the company has never asked us for any help on Aboriginal recruitment or any strategies. I go to senior management, meet the vice presidents. I relay this in. They're waiting for the scolding. And I go, well, look, here's the report card. I just got this information. And I said, I tell them this story. And they look at me, and I said, you as vice presidents, how is the raw intelligence from your managers who are working with Aboriginal people, how is that filtering up into to you? What type of knowledge and reports do you need? What decisions do you need to take those people and move them into senior management positions? And so it shifted their thinking to start thinking about what's their role. They have a job, they're VPs, and they've got some leadership decisions. But the silos that we have inside companies, the silos that we have inside government, and the silos that we have inside Aboriginal organizations is prevalent. And it's hard to break down those silos, but we must create and help people create horizontal and vertical integrated strategies. Using scores, it helps create correlations and create connections between and among these areas. And it starts to bring, for the first time, we think, some real precision to a firm. One of the examples I often use is, if you were going to go to Japan or China, how would you prepare your strategy for your company to enter those markets? And they lay out all the right answers. We get ready, we think about the culture, we think about the business climate. They probably don't think alike, one side of, Chile to the other. They get it right. If you apply the same international business practices and principles at home with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit across Canada, you'll do pretty good. But we see people make mistakes every day. So I want to close with some questions for you. How do we awaken and engage employers? We've got the converted. We get the same usual suspects. How do we get other sectors of the economy to see Aboriginal people as a dividend? We have the foreign workers program. Employers are getting hit over the head with that. I'm really excited that Tim Hortons and McDonald's are members of our leadership circle. Why? Because I feel that if Native youth work in the service sector, like 72% of other Canadians, and acquire a lot of skill sets between 15 and 25, we won't have to spend money on 30-year-olds for life upgrading skills. We can then redirect those funds to do apprenticeship training, university support, technology support. How can we better coordinate and connect and support our national employers and the 300 plus First Nations, Métis, and Inuit asset centers across Canada? We've devolved training dollars to the communities. It's very, very confusing for companies to connect with this many employment centers, and it's our responsibility about how do we better create coordination mechanisms and strategies to help them. How do we multiply things that are working? How do we take things that might work in Atlantic Canada, ship it over to the West Coast, and then up north? Number 3, how can we drive and support successful partnership building? And number 4, how can we improve employment, business, and CR outcomes for our people? You know, the elder started off today talking about the importance, he talked about the importance of voice. And I'm going up to the territories, and this woman was quoted, 1992, being Native in Canada. One of the first things I read on Native issues, Esther Jacko. The human voice leaves a lasting imprint on human memory and feelings, because so much heart and spirit can be communicated through the voice like no other medium. Patricia, I like what you said about pick up the phone, talk to people. It's amazing what happens when we have conversations. Teamwork is not about avoiding conflict. In fact, the 5 parts of teamwork are trust, commitment, conflict, accountability, results. Conflict is not negative. Constructive conflict is constructful. Differences of opinion, rigorous debate. That's why we have so much oral discussion in our communities. We're our own opposition. We're our own debaters. We really scrutinize each other. But then once we get behind something, commitment to deliver and be accountable to our communities, to our people. If you want to reach out further, Holly Cooper is here from Ottawa. She'd like to be at dinner tonight. You can talk to her more about our work and the work that we're doing. And let me just close with this. Sitting Bull said, let's put our heads together to see what we can do for all of our children. And I think the real future is about all of our children. And so as we look to embrace and raise Aboriginal people up and companies up the inclusion continuum, let's look to Aboriginal people for our worldviews and our leadership. We have solutions to many of the challenges that are facing Canada. Our leaders are excited about the partnership opportunities. We need to overcome and build more social capital, and social capital are the bonds and linkages between and among people. I want to be a better leader. I'm a better leader than I was yesterday. I've made mistakes. And I want to be a better leader tomorrow. I want to thank the Congress for pulling together and executing this Creative Leaders Forum, because I think this is the day and age that we do actually need to really inspire and build the leadership acumen, support, networks between and among all our people. And Elder, when I say all our people, in Cree we say Tateak, all my relations. This is all about us working together, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people together. I want to thank you for letting me bring my voice to this Leaders Forum today. Make which, tapui na nasko.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'd like to add another question to your list. It's one that I have always wondered. You know how many of our corporations say, people are our most important asset? Have you ever heard that before? And then I've always wondered this, right? So when I look at a balance sheet of a company, my company's included, the assets don't include people at all, right? They don't. You know where the people show up? They don't show up on the balance sheet as an asset. They show up on the income statement as an expense line item. I think there's another question there. I think we need to change generally accepted accounting principles, or whatever they call GAAP these days. Thank you so much, Kelly and Monique. We have about 10 minutes for dialogue. Would anybody like to make some comments, or ask a question, or answer a question that was posed to you? Microphone number 2, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rob Russell. I'm the Director of Business Development for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. Thank you so much for your presentations. We're so glad that you accepted your invitation to speak here today. I guess my question is, the whole day we've heard conversations about how do we address Aboriginal people. And in all that conversation, I didn't hear a lot about how do we address the diversity within Aboriginal cultures and Aboriginal people itself. So when people say they have a retention program, an employment or training program, they say for Aboriginal people. But I'm wondering, when you decide to do a program, do Do you look to diversity within our community to say we have some people who are on reserve, some people who are off reserve? And how do you address that factor?
I'll take and then Kelly will jump in.
Thank you.
When we started looking a few years ago, when Ed Clark said, and he actually called me, can you imagine, like I was a junior person, he called me to his office and he says, I want to make Aboriginal a priority and a strategic priority at TD. What do we need to do? And so we started looking at it, and over the years, what we realized was we had to engage Aboriginal people and our employees to figure out what is the language, how do we make it much more comfortable. We can measure anything that you want. Like there's so many measurements out there, but the true fact is you're only as successful as the stories your employees tell. So when we said, we got a group of employees together, this was about 6 years ago, and we said, we're gonna do, part of our diversity training is about inclusion of Aboriginal people. How should we do this? Do we call ourselves Indian, Native, Aboriginal, Indigenous? Like, what do we call ourselves and what would be acceptable? And when we went out to the community as well, and I remember talking to a number of chiefs, and I asked the same question. What was really critical, and one of the chiefs said this to me, I don't care what you call me, but I want you to call me the same thing as when I'm not in the room with you. I went, good point, I will do that. And I relate that story over and over within TD and to anybody that would listen to me as well. You have to do it with respect. So when we do our training, we do include our Aboriginal people because it's important, and we bring in speakers so that our employees can actually listen and talk to them as well and ask questions. Ed Clark, and for me, when I look at leadership and particularly diversity, it has to be top down. And it also, we have to put governance around it. And we have a leadership council, and Barrett Mazarani, who's now our CEO, is our chair of our diversity commitment to not only our employees, but to the communities. And that's where it starts. For us, it really is grassroots initiatives, and it is in everything we do. This isn't a part-time thing that we do at TD. It is in absolutely everything that we do and everything we communicate, including our commitments to the communities as well.
Well, thank you for the question. You have to approach diversity in the same way you approach diversity in Canada. I'm a believer in developing frameworks, and you allow diversity to flourish within that framework. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me, airports, planes, conferences, Kelly, if you could just do this with your people, you. And many of you have had this happen. And, you know, I tongue-in-cheek, I'll say to them, you know, if they're from BC, I'll just say, you know, if you could say to all the people in British Columbia, just get them to think like along the same lines. Canada is full of diversity. Provinces and territories are 13 jurisdictions. Whenever I hear things about not respecting diversity, you know, you got so many, you know, Aboriginal groups, they all want to, you know, be independent and so on. I go, yeah, you know, it's like those darn provinces and territories. Why don't we just get rid of the Education Act and make one education standard in this country? Put everybody through, what are those year endings, what are those grade 12 exams, you know. Or why don't we just clump everybody in the West and create one standard Red Seal program? And I'm serious about these things. I think we are a small country of 35 million people. Sweden and Norway laugh at us about the fact that we don't have very many national standards and approaches, because we, the Aboriginal people, are doing exactly what the provinces and territories are doing. We're creating many, many silos. We want our diversity, but I liked earlier there was people talking about how do we actually create collaborative mechanisms and approaches. The other thing is, very quickly, just most Canadians simply have not been informed or educated. That's why I spoke knowledge levels. And when you explain to them about the diversity, they go, yeah, I never really thought about it, but if there was 1,800 language groups prior to contact, I guess there was a lot of diversity. And it's a way to just sort of educate people, and people are pretty smart and they get it. And the final point on this is, I say, do you think Aboriginal people know other Aboriginal people? The leaders I know, the Aboriginal leaders I know, for example, let's say they're going to go up to Iqaluit and they're going to speak They do their homework. Who are the Inuit? What is their histories? What are their issues? They don't know. They're lost maybe about the Inuit issue as somebody in Winnipeg or here in Ottawa. So I think that's the other thing, is that it does take homework to get to know the diversity and get to know people. So thanks for your question.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
There it is. I just want to say thanks. I think you're both really great speakers. You got good senses of humor. I just wanted to ask you what you thought about one thing. So you both talked about mentorship in different capacities. Kelly, you talked about like e-mentoring and how you wanted to see people come together on the internet. And Monique, you mentored, and I also want to apologize, Patricia, I think I called you Monique earlier, so I just want to say sorry. I mixed you up. Yeah, and also you talked about mentorship as a means of keeping students in high school. And so what we've done recently at Carleton is we've, under the Aboriginal Enriched Support Program, we have a high school mentorship program where students that identify as Aboriginal go into a high school and work at lunch or in classrooms to, basically at lunch hour we keep the kids at school so they don't leave. You know, and then we're giving them food so they're fed, and then we help them with their homework so they do it. And it's really simple, and half of it's about relationship building as opposed to actually tutoring. But we've seen a lot of success in the past few years, and the program's actually grown into an elementary school to like assist the needs that the elementary school has about bringing Aboriginal education. So that's really inclusive, and I've seen it make a difference with youth. But I'd like to ask what you think about the sort of programs, and if you would be interested in supporting those, and if you think they would help education.
I love it. That's what we need. Look, someone mentioned earlier we were traders. I mean, look at the fur trade. We led the fur trade. We were innovators in the fur trade. There's numerous examples. The first currency in this country, folks, was an Aboriginal currency. What was it? Capital M, capital B. What did it stand for? Made beaver. For so many made beavers, you got so many guns and so on and so forth. We were part of currency. We were part of trade. We understood, you know, it's like the stock market, but we understood trade and commerce. The first ration houses built in this country were to have salt and flour so that Indians and Métis could go get 40 beavers a week instead of 22. It was an economic rationale. We need today to get ahead on the internet, on the whole technology curve. Every elder I know has got a cell phone, the youth and so on. So what you're doing is excellent. I'll give you my card after. We're forming a volunteer advisory committee. I want to expand this. And at the end of the day, the power of connecting people to see themselves in the workforce. I mean, go ask 5 15-year-olds if they really see themselves working at Royal Bank or TD. And they'll look at you with glazed eyes. But we need to push them. We need to say, you can actually do that. I never ask a kid if they're going to get grade 12. Never. Not my vocabulary. In fact, I wish we'd stop talking about grade 12 completion rates. What are you taking when you're done grade 12? That's my question. You need a mentor. You got to take responsibility for yourself. I want you connected. I want you to talk. I want you to learn about workplaces. We want non-native people to learn about our culture. I want you to learn about the culture of work. I put responsibility. It's a two-way street. So we need people like you, young people, to put peer pressure on your own peers to say, hey, we have to get on the internet. We need to meet employers. We need to see this world of work. We need to explore our options. That's what our elders have taught us forever. It's called, you have to take responsibility yourself to do these things. And you can draw analogies back to hunting and so on. But it's true. I mean, people do learn and take responsibility to learn these things. It's very same in the market today. And I just think e-mentorship is a way to accelerate those outcomes. It's going to create social capital. I had a guy at Hydro One in Ontario say to me, Kelly, this is a great concept, but he said, do you really think a white guy in Toronto can mentor a kid from up north? In Nunavut, he said. Because I used Nunavut as an example. I looked at him and I said, sir, you're probably going to learn more about Nunavut and the Inuit than the kid might learn from you. It's called reverse mentoring. And that's exactly what we need to do in this country. That person is probably going to end up working in a non-native workplace. They need to meet you. We need to break these divides. So there's the beauty of all these employers and volunteers is, how do we bring people? Let me take it one step further. I look and I see native leaders in this room. Michelle, right here beside me. Monique. Harriet, may I look across here? Mary Jane. I want to do reverse mentoring. I want Aboriginal leaders mentoring non-Native kids in high school. That's leadership. Our people have always exercised leadership. It's what Stephen spoke about lunchtime. And if we do this well, we're going to create some new social capital. And they won't say it's not just for the natives. They're actually trying to build a better, stronger Canada. And it's only going to come through with some workplace leadership. At the end of the day, you got to have employer leadership at the table. I've been in this game a long time. I know how the game is won and lost. And if the employers aren't there, I mean, I tell you, we'll be talking about this stuff 20 years, it'll be the same negative reports. So that's why I'm excited about what you're doing on e-mentorship. We're going to support you, and we're going to get you to help launch Kachita's e-mentorship. Keep up the good work, man. You're a good leader. You're good.
I just
Give
want
him
to
a round of
mention,
applause. He's doing a great job, this guy.
Thanks.
He's up on the microphone.
I also wanted to thank Stephen too for his stories, and I wanted to. Oh, geez, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, with the I just wanted to mention two things that I've learned from the mentorship program that were the most motivating, and I find that when you tell youth that I was here, I'm getting out of high school, I was going to university, and then I stopped and thought about all the students coming behind me, and I just tell them that I stopped. And I turned around and I figured, the best thing I can do right now is not go into the workforce. It's to figure out what I'm going to do with these people behind me, and because they're going to be in my position soon too. And it's the amount of they feel really at peace because of that. I found that like Stephen said, peace is actually prosperity. So like the real prosperity they find is when they're at peace, when they know they have support, like from people just a little older. So I'd encourage anybody to reach out to younger people because it makes the biggest difference you could ever imagine. You go ahead, Shalala.
Thank you. We often overlook the wisdom of youth, right? Thank you. Monique and Kelly. Oh,
Time for one.
Okay, one more question?
It's more of a invitation. I've, since starting at ACOM, I was telling you this story that I'm also interested in, raising the profile of Aboriginal within the company, within our website, and as we did a recent buyout of another quite big company, so we're making changes to our website. So I'm looking to have Aboriginal, highlighted on our website, not having to, look for it inside the environment or anywhere else. The other thing that I want to do is to do a series of talks, interviews with different Aboriginal leaders to, again, highlight and promote Aboriginal within our company for employees to understand who we are as First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, but also to encourage our corporate level to look at hiring more and higher level positions, not necessarily just the worker bees. And so I'd be interested in you guys coming to talk to us and really to encourage that, broadening the thinking on Aboriginal, because we're very much interested in diversity. We get the CEO messages talking about diversity and inclusion and women, and we're in 150 countries. That's great, but Kelly, listening to you, what happens when we're here in Canada? So I want to invite you to come and talk, and we'll send it out actually probably to all of ACOM and across 150 countries. I think it would be a really cool experience.
We'll give you a great rate.
My negotiator.
You got the next gen. You do next gen, right? This guy here? Who's next gen, right? So, what's interesting? I want to just close on this, and I mentioned, you saw my last slide. Craig Hall is my Chief Fulfillment Officer, and Holly Cooper. Holly Cooper, right in the back, comes after the boss has finished his talk. Yeah. She's heard the message. What's interesting is I'm talking to companies now about international Indigenous inclusion. We were down in Australia because they were very interested in our employer-focused approaches and models. We're doing some work with some companies in the States, and we know that some of these mining companies, they're in Chile. When you go to Chile, 60% of the companies that mine in Chile are Canadian companies. Some of them are talking about fondly, and others negatively. And I was just down last month speaking with Gary Davis. He's head of the Native American Indian Economic Development Group down in Phoenix. And I got to know Gary last year, and he's the good-looking guy that was the actor in Indian in the Cupboard. He's the actor, and he's the executive director of this group. And I'm talking about cross-border stuff. What things can we do with employers, especially those that operate both in Canada and the States? Our Native Americans are just like us here. We're in our silos, and and we need some connectors. But when you start talking about international inclusion with companies, and you elevate it beyond First Nations, Métis, and you even say, the Mapuche Indians in Chile, think about Australia, and how can we then adapt your strategies for different country markets? All of a sudden, the interest changes. So bottom line is, international, if it gets their attention to think about those issues, then let's do it. But it's a great way to then how to broker those practices right here in Canada, because you need to practice, as Rob said, the diversity. You need to adapt them for different First Nations, Métis, Inuit, urban, far north, geography, age groups, under 45, over 45. I mean, you've got to segment this thing every which way. That's the way business is done. And when you understand how to segment it, it actually gets quite easy. And that's where I think there's some real opportunities.
So can I promise I won't take too long. On the mentoring, we love mentoring, and we actually do a lot of grassroots initiatives around mentoring right across Canada. So we'd love to talk to you. We have an internal mentoring, Aboriginal mentoring group as well. They would love to get involved because they're always looking for different initiatives. So for us, volunteering and that type of stuff with our employees, we're right there. So that would be great. One of the other things that I was thinking about, Patricia, it'd be great to be able to tell more stories. We've got such great leaders that are Aboriginal. And how do we get them front and center, whether it's in a totally different industry, and really look at the realms of possibilities for individuals? I think that's really key. And when I think about the financial industry, and I know my colleague from RBC is probably going to shake his head, what we've got to do a better job at is when you think about our remote communities, a lot of that, we don't have banks. I didn't have a bank in my community. I don't know about you, but we had no banks. How do we help teach financial literacy in our remote communities? We just launched an initiative where we can bring banking to remote communities. We have people that will come, we'll set you up accounts, we'll set you up access, and now with the image capturing, we can take a photocopy of the check, it's gone into your account. And we work with the community, and we think financial literacy is going to be key, as well as the link to education. And Sherry Gray is here, she's got a lot more information, but we do really think that's really the start in supporting our the remote communities as well.
So Monique Bateman and Kelly Lendsay, thank you so much for so powerfully holding down the anchor position in this conference. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you. So I would like to introduce Jim DeVoe. Jim is the Chief Operating Officer of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. He holds a Master of Business Administration degree from St. Mary's in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he began his career as a social worker in Alberta, working on one of the reserves. In 2003, Jim moved to Ottawa, and prior to joining CAP, he was with Nepean Community Resource Centre and the Caldwell Family Centre. Jim DeVoe bringing comments on behalf of CAP.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to keep it brief because I know we're at time now, and we're all conscious that we're going to be going for dinner here tonight at 6 p.m. So what I'd most likely like to say on behalf of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples is thank you for coming. Thank you for being here and being a part of this important first symposium on creative leaders. Definitely to those that spoke, we were very grateful for the leadership that you brought to the table in terms of the comments and your wealth of experience. One of the things that I would like to do is also highlight, so I'd had a longer speech that our staff had written, so I'm keeping it brief. I'd like to highlight the leadership that we have within our staff, and particularly Rob, where's Rob at? And Frankie, who probably are doing something else right now to help us in supporting this. To Stephanie and to Gabe, who did an amazing job pulling this together, so a round of applause to them. So as you see, it's been modified from an overview of the day to a thank you, so which is very, very appropriate at this time. I'd also like to thank Dr. Marie DeLorme. for her guidance through this program and her leadership. It was, I met Dr. DeLorme not that long ago on a plane of all places. And I tell the story that I got on this plane and I was flying on a business trip, and I get on the plane hoping that no one would talk to me. And I had my sneakers and blue jeans, my sneakers on and blue jeans and a book. And I thought, I don't want to talk to anybody for 4 hours so I can have some peace. And I got on the plane and I had one of the best experiences I've ever had in terms of creative leaders and leadership, meeting Dr. DeLorme. And so it's been a true honor to work with her and definitely to have her here. So thank you, Dr. DeLorme. As a token of our sincere appreciation, we have a little gift for Dr. DeLorme. And also, I'd like to acknowledge our board of directors who have supported us in having this symposium and their commitment and their leadership in terms of knowing that this is very key to our people in terms of economic growth, in terms of engaging with our youth, and they're very committed to always new innovative initiatives that will help us achieve that, and this is one part of that commitment that they bring to the table. So conscious of the time, I'm going to actually, oh yes, thank you, and I've been reminded to thank the Government of Canada under HRSDC, or ESDC as they're called these days. James Sutherland, who's the Director General, was here and he had to leave. But they sponsored and helped us make this day be possible, so we're very grateful for the Government of Canada. And I'm going to share my time with our elder, who is going to give us some prayers and closing thoughts as well. So, Elder.
So I was asked to make some summary comments. I'm going to do this in about 1 minute. You know, I was listening, and I took pages of notes today. We heard from communities, we heard from industry, we heard from policing, we heard from NGOs, social enterprise, social entrepreneurs. You know what this is called? This is called collective impact. And collective impact is when we bring a diverse group of people together like we have today, and we talk about how we can make a difference. It is only when we work together that we can change the reality that was talked about in Hope DeVoe Henderson's presentation and turn it into a different kind of reality. You were invited here because of your expertise, because of your background, because of your understanding, and because of your leadership. And I would like to thank you for engaging in informative, interesting, respectful, and forward-thinking dialogue. This is what, when Jim explained this symposium to me, Jim, his board, and his staff envisioned. They envisioned it, they pulled you together, but you made it a reality. And with that, I'm going to ask Elder Gordon Williams, who opened our session, to close it off, and we will be adjourned after he's finished. And don't forget, we have dinner tonight at 6:30 in this room, and you do not want to miss Monique Bateman. She gives a phenomenal presentation. Elder Williams.
Let us have a closing. Great Spirit, it has been wonderful to be here today, to share the visions of so many people that are working diligently to change the landscape of the workforce of our country. We realize that although much has been accomplished, there's still a lot to do. We would ask you that as we expand our various businesses and our activities, that we begin to realize that there is much to be done to include the Aboriginal component of our country. Too long have they been on the sidelines. Too long have they been invisible to many. Too long have they been ignored. So we would ask you, as we go forward as people interested in promoting a different way of doing business, help us to do it in the right way, in a good way. And be with us now as we go our separate ways, and keep us close in spirit. For this we ask on behalf of all of our relations.